Have you ever been hurt by the very person standing next to you, only to be told it was just a joke? A comment made in front of a crowd, a half smile, and there you are, wondering if you're being too sensitive. I lived with that feeling for 7 years. 7 years of being diminished, overlooked, turned into a punchline so someone else could feel more important. Until one evening, my husband stood up in the middle of a family gathering and said, "Anyone want to trade wives?" And for the first time in my life, someone actually said yes. I used to think I was the kind of woman who could endure half-joking, half-serious remarks, endure the frowns, the sighs, the way he told stories about me as if I were a project he'd unwillingly been assigned to manage. Endure the feeling of being slowly worn down, as long as the family stayed peaceful, as long as no one felt uncomfortable, as long as nothing turned into a big scene. But there are moments, just one moment is enough, when you realize you're not a wife. You're a prop. That evening in Nashville, the heat clung to the skin. The air was thick with the smell of charcoal, grilled meat, garlic butter, and scorched onions. My sister Evelyn's backyard glowed under yellow string lights draped along the wooden fence. Crickets chirred in the bushes. Laughter collided like ice clinking in glasses. A perfectly ordinary barbecue. Unless you were standing where I was. I stood near the picnic table, holding a bowl of coleslaw I'd made that morning. Finely shredded cabbage, carrots, a homemade dressing, a touch of pepper to cut the richness. I'd prepared it carefully, the way I prepared everything in our household. Quietly, thoughtfully, trying to make everyone comfortable. And as always, I hoped he'd be better tonight. I hoped he wouldn't drink too much. I hoped he wouldn't turn me into a joke in front of other people. I hoped, how stupid it sounds, that he still had some shred of respect left for me, at least in front of family. Then his voice sliced straight through the warm air. "Hey, anyone want to trade wives?" That sound wasn't just words. It was like a blade brushing across your wrist. Not deep at first, but enough for you to know. You're going to bleed. I turned around. Blake stood by the grill, a beer can in his hand, his lips curled into that smile he always wore when he had an audience. He scanned the crowd like an actor on stage, finding the perfect angle for the spotlight. "She's stubborn," he went on, clearly enjoying himself. "And way too independent. Independent to the point where it's probably not good for her." Scattered laughter broke out. Some people laughed out of discomfort. Some laughed because they didn't know what else to do. Some laughed out of habit. A man makes a joke about his wife, and you laugh. It's a social ritual. I didn't laugh. I stood there, the bowl of coleslaw suddenly heavy as stone. 1 second earlier, I could hear the meat sizzling on the grill. The next, every sound sank as if water had flooded my ears. All I could hear was his voice, carving itself into me word by word. "She works too much," he continued. "Has an opinion about everything. And don't even get me started on how she always thinks she's smarter than everyone else in this room." He lifted his beer can toward me as if presenting a product. "Seriously, guys, I'm giving her away. Free. Free? I am Serena. 32 years old. 7 years married to Blake. 7 years of hearing things like this. Lighter, harsher, subtler, but always with the same purpose. Pushing me down so he could stand taller." I looked around. My sister, Evelyn, stood on the other side of the yard, her hand frozen mid-air over a tray of burgers. The look in her eyes was one I knew well. Pity mixed with helplessness. Anger she couldn't act on. as if she wanted to rush over and pull me away, but was afraid of ruining the mood. Others looked away. One person suddenly found their plate of potatoes fascinating. Another pretended to focus on a child running around the yard. No one said anything, and that made me feel cold. Strangely, in the middle of a sweltering summer evening, my chest felt cold. Cold with the realization that when humiliation comes wrapped as a joke, people choose safety. People choose silence. Blake glanced around, noticed the laughter wasn't loud enough, and turned it up a notch. He always knew how. "Seriously, she's always so tightly wound," he said. "Like the whole world has to follow her schedule. If anyone wants to switch, I'm ready. Right now." He laughed. A few people laughed with him. I still didn't laugh. Something familiar rose up inside me. Not just sadness, not just shame, but anger. Yet my anger, for years, had been locked inside a cage of politeness. The cage of, a good wife doesn't embarrass her husband. The cage of, don't make a scene. The cage of, everyone's having fun. I'd lived inside that cage so long that sometimes I forgot the key was still in my own hand. Blake added a few more remarks, listing my faults, like he was reading a menu. Working late, having opinions, not being obedient, always wanting to control things, not being soft like other wives. Each sentence was another nail. I looked at him, really looked. And in that moment, I realized the most frightening thing of all. He wasn't joking. He spoke because he believed it. He believed that the things that made me me, my ambition, my independence, my mind, were defects that needed fixing. He believed I should be grateful that he could put up with me. The smell of grilled meat no longer tempted me. All I tasted was metal at the back of my throat, the way it feels when you swallow too many tears. A light breeze passed through the yard. The string lights trembled. I heard crickets and cicadas singing. Everything was normal, except me, standing there exposed in my sister's backyard. And I wondered, again, not for the first time, what kind of woman have I become? I used to be someone who walked into meetings with confidence, someone who could say no, someone who didn't apologize for existing. And now here I was, clutching a bowl of coleslaw like a useless shield, forcing down the lump in my throat so I wouldn't ruin someone else's party. Blake tossed out another line, half teasing, half contemptuous. "Come on, anyone brave enough to take her? I'm serious." And at that exact moment, I saw a man at the corner of the patio set his glass down. He looked straight at Blake. No smile, no avoidance, no pretending. His gaze was so calm it sent a shiver through me. Before I could even think, who is that? He spoke, clearly, firmly, like a stone dropped into still water. "I'll take her." The entire backyard fell silent. And I knew in that instant, everything was about to move in a direction no one, not even me, could undo. The moment he said, "I'll take her," I swear time slowed down. Not the cinematic kind of slow motion meant to look beautiful, but the kind that throws your heartbeat off rhythm. The kind where your brain can't quite process what just happened. No one in my sister's backyard said a word. No laughter. No startled exclamations. Just the forgotten sizzle of meat left on the grill and the suddenly deafening hum of insects in the oak trees. Blake froze. The smile, the one that had been glued to his face all evening, stiffened. I saw it clearly. Just a single beat, but enough for me to know. He hadn't planned for this. "Ha, ha," Blake laughed, trying to pull the mood back together. But the sound was hollow and forced, like an empty can rolling across concrete. "You're kidding me, right?" he said, tilting his head toward the man. "You think you can handle her?" The man, Ryan. I knew his name. A neighbor 3 houses down. An architect, 35, divorced. That was all I knew. We'd exchanged greetings by the mailbox, nodded to each other while mowing lawns in the morning. Polite, brief interactions. Nothing more. But now, he didn't look away from Blake. Ryan stood straight, his arms relaxed at his sides, his voice strangely calm. No sarcasm, no challenge, no showmanship. "I think I know what I'm saying." That simple sentence sent a chill straight down my spine. Blake smirked. He always smirked when he thought he still had control. "Trust me, buddy," Blake said, lifting his beer as if in a toast. "You have no idea what you'd be signing up for. She's not easy." I waited for Ryan to laugh, to back off, to say something like, "I'm just kidding," because that's what men usually do when they realize they've crossed a social line. But Ryan didn't. He only said, quietly but clearly, "I think I do." Then he turned to me, and that was when I truly couldn't breathe. His eyes didn't slide past me the way others did. He didn't look at me like a topic. He didn't look at me as Blake's wife. He looked at me like a person standing there, hearing every word being said about her. No pity, no vulgar curiosity, no scrutiny. Just seeing me. "So," Ryan said, his voice still even, "what time should I pick you up tomorrow night?" A polite question. Ordinary. Almost absurdly ordinary given the situation, and that ordinariness was what made it insane. I heard someone inhale sharply. Maybe my sister. Maybe me. I wasn't sure anymore. It felt like all the air had been sucked out of the backyard. I could clearly hear cicadas buzzing in the oak tree, a car passing somewhere down the street, ice clinking softly against the side of a glass. Blake whipped around to face me. His face went pale beneath his tan. For the first time that evening, I saw him lost. No script, no backup joke, no crowd to hide behind. You're not serious, are you?" Blake said, his voice lower now, more urgent. "It's just a joke, Serena." Just a joke. How many times had I heard that? I looked at Blake. Really looked at him. The man I once believed would stand by me if the whole world turned its back. The man who had turned me into a punchline in front of my own family. And I felt something crack. Not loudly, not explosively, but a small, deep fracture, like the first thin crack in a frozen lake when spring begins to arrive. I looked at Ryan. He didn't rush me. He didn't lean closer. He didn't signal for me to choose. He just stood there, waiting. As if my answer, whatever it might be, deserved respect. I realized my hands were shaking. For 7 years, I had trained myself to suppress my instincts. To watch Blake and anticipate how he wanted me to respond, to reshape myself to fit the mold. But tonight, that mold suddenly disappeared. 7, I heard myself say. Calm, strangely calm, certain enough that I barely recognized my own voice. 7 p.m. There was a gasp. Someone whispered, "Oh my God!" Blake blurted out, "Serena, what the hell are you doing?" I didn't answer. I set the bowl of coleslaw down on the wooden table, carefully, gently, as if what I was setting down wasn't a dish, but 7 years of silence. I smoothed my dress, took a deep breath, and turned toward the gate. Behind me, Blake called my name. His voice rose, sharp, frantic, threaded with a kind of fear I had never heard from him before. My sister called out too, worried. I didn't turn around. Each step on the gravel path sounded louder than it should have. My heart pounded wildly in my chest. My hands trembled so badly I had to clench them to keep it from showing. I was afraid, but beneath the fear was something else, something I hadn't felt in years. Lightness, as if something had just been lifted off my shoulders. When I stepped through the gate, I didn't know what tomorrow would bring. I didn't know whether I had just destroyed my marriage or saved myself. But I knew one thing. For the first time in a very long while, I was no longer anyone's joke. And behind me, I heard Blake, for the first time, fall silent. I wasn't prepared for that moment at all. There was no plan, no script, no confident speech rehearsed in my head the way people imagine when they hear this story later. The truth is, when I said 7 p.m., my mind was almost completely blank. Only my heart was pounding wildly. I walked out of my sister's backyard, the yellow string lights still shimmering behind me along the fence. The laughter had vanished, replaced by a heavy silence, as if the entire party was holding its breath. I followed the gravel path, each step crunching dry and loud. The sound felt so big it scared me. I was afraid it would pull me back. Afraid that if I slowed down for even a second, I'd turn around, force a smile, and say the familiar line, "Come on, it's just a misunderstanding." For 7 years, I had lived on sentences like that. I stepped through the gate. The air on the street was a little cooler. An old elm tree at the end of the block cast long shadows across the sidewalk. I stopped beneath it, as if it were the final boundary between the woman I had been and something I'd never dared to name. My hands were shaking violently. I had to clench them together, my nails digging into my skin, just to remind myself that I was here, that I was present, that I had just said something that could change my entire life. What the hell just happened? The question looped in my head, unanswered. I thought about Blake, about his face when I said 7, the way the color drained from it, the way he looked at me as if I had broken some unspoken rule, one that only he was allowed to make. And then I realized something that made my chest ache. He wasn't shocked because I might go on a date with someone else. He was shocked because I dared to decide without asking his permission. That thought hurt and woke me up at the same time. I leaned against the trunk of the elm tree and took a deep breath. The night air filled my lungs, carrying the scent of damp grass and sap. I tried to steady my breathing, but my heart still felt like it was trying to escape my chest. I was afraid of tomorrow, afraid of what Blake would say, afraid of my family's looks, afraid of being labeled a terrible wife, an ungrateful woman, someone who made a big deal out of a joke. But woven through the fear was a feeling I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years. Relief. I thought about all the times Blake had joked about me in front of others. About my forced smiles, my dismissive shrugs. I'd told myself that was just his way, that he didn't mean harm, that I should let it go. But tonight, standing under that old elm tree, I finally admitted the truth. Every one of those jokes took something from me. A little confidence, a little voice, a little belief that I was loved for who I was. I remembered the early days of our marriage. Blake used to say he loved my independence. He said I was smart, decisive, full of potential. He held my hand and said, "We're a team." But as I began to move forward, he began to step back and pull me with him. "You work too much. You always have opinions. You're not like other wives." At first I laughed. I thought they were affectionate jokes. I thought marriage meant compromise, adjustment. I didn't realize I was shrinking. I looked up at the sky. The moon hung between the branches. I wondered how many times I had stood under a sky like this, asking myself why I felt lonely inside a marriage. My phone vibrated softly in my dress pocket. A message. I startled, my heart jumping. Part of me feared it was Blake. Feared lines of accusation, commands, demands that I come back and fix this. But when I pulled out my phone, it wasn't Blake. It was Ryan. Just one short message. If you're still okay with it, I'll pick you up at 7. No pressure. If you change your mind, just say so. No exclamation points, no pushing, no performative enthusiasm. Just giving me a choice. I stared at the screen for a long moment. And then I realized no one had spoken to me like that in 7 years. No one had said, if you change your mind, that's okay too. I didn't reply right away. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and looked down the empty street ahead of me. Familiar houses lined up in silence, like mute witnesses to my life. I didn't know what I would do tomorrow. I didn't know if I would have the courage to keep going. But I knew one thing with absolute clarity, so clear it made my chest burn. Saying 7 p.m. wasn't agreeing to go on a date. It was agreeing with myself. Agreeing that I was tired. Agreeing that I deserved respect. Agreeing that I didn't need permission to exist. I turned and continued walking home. My steps still trembled, but they no longer hesitated. Behind me, the party went on. Or maybe it fell apart. I didn't know. And for the first time, I realized I didn't need to. When I opened the door and stepped into the house Blake and I called home, I didn't know what storm awaited me. But somewhere deep inside, a voice I had long forgotten was whispering, "Don't go back. Don't shrink yourself again." And I knew that from the moment I said 7 p.m., there was no road that led back to the old version of me. That night, I sat alone in the living room. I didn't turn on the lights. Only the faint glow from the wall clock cast blurry streaks across the walls. Tick, tock, tick, tock. Each passing second felt like a reminder that time was still moving forward, even though my life had just veered in a different direction. Blake still hadn't come home. I guessed he was staying at the barbecue, telling the story the way he always did best, turning himself into the victim, turning me into the difficult wife, the one who can't take a joke, the one who blew a small thing out of proportion. He always did that. I leaned back in the chair and closed my eyes. And as if someone had unlocked a door that had been sealed for years, memories began to rush in, uninvited. I remembered the first time I met Blake. I was 23, fresh out of college, holding a marketing degree and a future I believed was wide open. I started working at Travala Group, a mid-sized company in Nashville. Blake was in sales. He had a confident smile, a steady voice, a way of entering a room that made people notice. He looked at me as if I were special. In the beginning, Blake loved everything about me. Or at least, I believed he did. He loved how hard I worked. He loved that I spoke up in meetings. He loved how excited I was when I talked about new ideas, strategies, and the things I wanted to build. "You're going to go far," he once said, holding my hand so tightly I felt anchored to the world. "And I'll be there, right beside you." I believed him. When I got my first promotion, Blake took me out to celebrate. He bragged about me to friends, to coworkers, to anyone who would listen. I was his fiancée, the smart girl, his pride. We talked about the future as if it were a house waiting to be built. I thought we were a team. But then, the colors began to change. At first, very subtly. When I got my second promotion, faster than expected, Blake laughed and said, "Guess you know how to impress the right people, huh?" He said it like a joke. I laughed too. But something inside me flinched, just a tiny, fleeting jolt. I told myself I was overthinking. When I stayed late at work to finish an important campaign, he complained, "Your job is always your number one priority." I apologized. When I suggested making a financial plan, saving to buy a house, he said I was controlling, obsessed with money, even though we were struggling with bills. I apologized, again. There was no explosive moment. No fist slammed on the table. No dramatic screaming fights, just small drops, steady and relentless, wearing down stone. And I didn't realize I was being worn down. Blake started using one word, very often. Stubborn. Every time I disagreed with him, I was stubborn. Every time I defended my opinion, I was stubborn. Every time I made a decision without asking him, I was stubborn, too independent, hard to live with. He turned the very things that once made him love me into reasons to blame me. I remember one night vividly. 3 years into our marriage, I was offered a position as marketing director at another company. Much higher pay. A huge opportunity. I came home with my heart racing, my head full of plans. Our first house, trips we could take, a more stable life. Blake wasn't happy. Not just unhappy. He was angry. He said I was trying to make him look inferior. That people would think he couldn't provide for his family if his wife earned more than he did. That I was selfish, thinking only of myself. I cried. He sulked. Silence stretched on for days. In the end, I turned the offer down. I convinced myself that marriage required sacrifice, that love meant compromise, that there would be another chance. But another chance never came. Sitting in the darkness of the living room, I realized a bitter truth. Blake didn't resent me because I was weak. He resented me because I was strong. Every step forward I took reminded him that he was standing still. And instead of stepping up with me, he chose to pull me down. What had I done all those years? I made myself smaller. I spoke less. I laughed less. I dreamed less. I became the easy version of myself, the version he could tolerate. And in return, what did I get? A husband willing to trade me like an old object. Tick, tock, tick, tock. The front door swung open. Blake came home. The smell of beer entered the living room before he did. He turned on the lights, squinting at me sitting there as if he hadn't expected me to still be waiting. "Oh," he said sarcastically. "So you finally decided to come home." I looked at him. Strangely enough, I didn't feel the pain I thought I would. Just exhaustion. And in that moment, I knew. The past had revealed itself. Love had been distorted. And the thing standing in front of me was no longer the man I once loved. Blake stood in the middle of the living room, the overhead light shining straight down on his face. That light exposed everything. The bloodshot eyes from drinking, the clenched jaw, the familiar irritation I had seen hundreds of times before. But tonight, something was different. Tonight, I didn't rush to stand up and soothe him. "You humiliated me in front of everyone," Blake said, tossing his keys onto the table. The metal clattered sharply. "Do you have any idea what they must think?" I stayed silent. My silence irritated him. Blake always hated that. He needed a reaction, tears, apologies, panic, anything to prove he was still in control. "You need to fix this," he went on, his voice dropping, slower now. The tone he used when he believed he was being reasonable. Tomorrow you call Ryan. You make it clear it was just a joke, that you weren't serious. I looked at him, not with the eyes of a frightened wife, but with the eyes of someone piecing things together. And then what? I asked. My voice was hoarse but steady. Then I apologized to you, like every other time? Blake frowned. You're my wife. You're supposed to be on my side. Supposed to? A small word, heavy as iron chains. Do you hear what you just said? I asked. Blake exhaled sharply, impatient. Don't make this complicated, Serena. Everyone knows it was just a joke. I laughed, a short, dry sound that surprised even me. If it was just a joke, I said, why were you so afraid when someone actually accepted it? The question hung in the air between us. I saw it land. Blake froze for a second. Then the anger seeped in, not exploding, but leaking out through each word. Because you're mine, he said. You don't get to agree to date someone else just because you're mad at me. The room seemed to shrink. I could hear my heart pounding. Yet strangely, I wasn't afraid anymore. I just felt clear. Yours? I repeated softly. Blake realized he'd said too much. He stepped back half a pace, changed his tone. That's not what I meant, he said quickly. I mean, you're my wife. We're a family. Family. Another word used like an anchor, holding me in place every time I tried to drift away. Family doesn't humiliate each other in public, I said. Family doesn't turn each other into jokes. Blake slammed his hand on the table. A glass of water rattled. You always make everything a big deal, he snapped. You're too sensitive. You don't know how to joke. That's why you don't have close friends. That's why people find you hard to be around. I closed my eyes for a second. There it was, that familiar pattern. The way he twisted everything until I doubted myself. He wasn't wrong. I was wrong for feeling hurt. He didn't hurt me. I was too sensitive. How long had I believed that? I opened my eyes. Do you know what you're doing? I asked. You're teaching me to be afraid of my own feelings. Blake scoffed. I'm teaching you to know your place. Know your place. That phrase had been used like an invisible whip. Every time I spoke up, I didn't know my place. Every time I wanted more, I didn't know my place. Every time I refused to stay silent, I didn't know my place. You don't love me, I said slowly. You love having me under your control. That made him explode. Who do you think you are? Blake shouted. You think you can survive without me? You think anyone out there would put up with your personality? I looked at him, and for the first time I saw fear in his eyes. Not fear of losing me. Fear of losing power. He stepped closer, lowering his voice as if sharing a secret. I'm just trying to protect you, he said. The world out there isn't as kind as you think. You'll regret it if you ruin this marriage. That was the final move. Planting fear. Fear of being alone. Fear of failing. Fear of being judged. Fear that no one else would ever love me. And I realized he had used that fear to keep me there for years. I stood up. When did you become so afraid of me? I asked. When did you start needing to make me smaller so you could feel bigger? Blake didn't answer. He just stared at me, like something was slipping through his fingers. You'll leave, he said coldly. But if you walk out that door tomorrow night, don't expect to come back. I looked at him for a long time. 7 years of love. 7 years of sacrifice. 7 years of self-doubt. And I understood something painful, but freeing. He wasn't threatening me. He was begging in the only way he knew how. I've come back too many times already, I said. Maybe it's time I move forward. I turned and walked toward the stairs, leaving Blake standing there in the room he once believed was his territory. And as I placed my foot on the first step, I knew. The fear that once kept me there had changed sides. I woke up to the sound of a kitchen cabinet being slammed shut. Not an accident. The deliberate kind of noise, meant to make sure someone else knew he was angry. Morning sunlight filtered through the bedroom curtains, pale and indifferent, as if nothing had happened the night before. For a brief moment, I almost believed it had all been a dream. Then I heard a chair scrape hard against the tile floor. Reality snapped back. I went downstairs. Blake was sitting at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee in front of him, already cold. He wasn't drinking it, just gripping the handle so tightly his knuckles were white. His jaw was clenched, the familiar sign that a serious talk was about to begin. I poured myself some coffee. My hands didn't shake. That surprised me. "You need to fix this," Blake said without looking at me. His voice was low, rigid, like he was issuing an order. "Fix what?" I asked, leaning against the counter. Blake looked up. His eyes were sharp, cold. "What happened last night? You call Ryan. Right now. You make it clear that it was all just a joke." I set my cup down, slowly. "And then what?" I asked. "I apologize to you?" "Of course," Blake said immediately. "You made me look like a fool in front of the whole neighborhood." I looked at him. Really looked. There was no, "Are you okay?" No. "What were you thinking last night?" Only his pride, placed above everything else. "Do you hear yourself?" I asked. "You're the one who stood in front of everyone and offered to trade wives. You made yourself look that way." "Don't turn this around," Blake snapped. "If you hadn't agreed to something that crazy, none of this would have happened." Ah. So now it was my fault he humiliated me. "I'm not calling," I said. The kitchen went dead silent. "What?" Blake asked, as if he hadn't heard me. "I said I'm not calling Ryan," I repeated calmly. "I'm not canceling." Blake shot to his feet. The chair toppled backward and hit the floor with a loud crash. "Are you out of your mind?" he yelled. "You're really planning to go on a date with him? You're my wife." I took a deep breath. "Do you remember?" I said. "Last night you said it was just a joke?" Blake hesitated. "If it was just a joke," I continued, "why are you so terrified?" His eyes flashed. "Because you're mine," Blake said, his voice low and dangerous. "You don't have the right to agree to go out with another man." There it was again. Mine. A chill ran down my spine, not from fear, but from clarity. Everything suddenly snapped into place, like the final piece of a picture I hadn't wanted to see. "I'm not an object," I said. "I don't belong to anyone." Blake scoffed. "Don't get philosophical. You don't understand how the world works, Serena. Go out there and you'll see. No one can put up with you. No one likes a woman who always wants to be better than everyone else." The familiar strike, straight at my deepest fear, being left behind. But this morning, that fear no longer had the same power. "What are you really afraid of, Blake?" I asked. "That I'll go on a date? Or that I'll realize there are people out there who don't need to make me smaller to feel secure?" He didn't answer right away. His lips pressed together. His chest rose and fell, not with rage, but with loss of control. "If you walk out that door tonight," he said, each word falling like ice, "don't come back. I won't accept this." I looked at him for a long time. 7 years ago, those words would have sent me into panic. I would have apologized, compromised, wondered if I was selfish, if I was overreacting. But this morning, I just felt tired. "You're giving me a choice," I said, "and you think I'm too afraid to make it." Blake narrowed his eyes. "You sure about that?" I took out my phone. The screen lit up. Ryan's message was still there. Brief, respectful, no pressure. 7 o'clock, I said. "I'm going." Blake froze. Truly froze. As if he had just realized the woman standing in front of him was no longer someone he owned. "You'll regret this," he said more quietly, but more venomously. "You're destroying 7 years of marriage for a neighbor." I shook my head. "No," I said. 7 years of marriage were destroyed because I disappeared inside them. I grabbed my bag and put on my coat. My hands trembled slightly, but my back was straight. As I walked toward the door, Blake called my name, not shouting now, but in the voice of someone about to lose something important. "Serena." I stopped. I didn't turn around. "You had too many chances," I said, "and I came back too many times." I opened the door. Daylight poured in, clear, uncompromising, unapologetic. And as the door closed behind me, I knew. Tonight wasn't just a date. It was the first time I refused to cancel myself at someone else's command. There are some things, once spoken, that can't be taken back. Not because they're too cruel, but because they're too true. That morning, after I closed the door behind me, I thought the confrontation was over. I thought Blake would go quiet, or angry, or sink into self-pity. Anything, except follow me all the way to the door. "Serena!" Blake called after me, his voice echoing down the hallway, sharper now, more urgent. "Come back here." I stopped, not because I wanted to listen, but because I wanted to know how far he was willing to go. I turned around. Blake stood in the doorway, daylight pouring in behind him, casting his face in shadow. In that moment, he didn't look like the man I had once loved. He looked like someone so afraid that he was finally saying out loud what he'd only ever thought. "You don't understand," he said quickly, as if slowing down would make me disappear. "You're not allowed to do this." I frowned. "Not allowed?" "Yes," he said. "You're my wife." That sentence, once so familiar, it felt like a blanket of safety. But this morning, it sounded like a rope. "And?" I asked. Blake took a sharp breath. I saw his chest rise and fall, as if he were trying to hold something back. "And you're mine." The words dropped between us. No explosion, no drama, just a deadly stillness. I looked at him without blinking. In my mind, memories suddenly lined up like fast-forwarded film reels. The times he cut me off in front of others, the times he decided for me, the times he allowed me to do certain things, but not others, the times he told me not to embarrass him. All of it led to this sentence. "Mine," I repeated softly. Blake knew the moment I repeated it that he'd gone too far. He rushed to correct himself, like someone who had slipped and briefly revealed his true face. "I mean, you belong to this family," he said, "to this marriage." But it was too late. I shook my head. "Do you know where the red line is?" I asked. My voice was so calm it surprised even me. "It's when you stop seeing me as a human being." Blake frowned. "You're exaggerating." "No, not this time." "You didn't say, 'I love you,'" I continued. "You didn't say, 'I'm afraid of losing you.' You said, 'You're mine.' That isn't love, Blake. That's ownership." His face hardened. "So what?" he shot back. "We're married. That's normal." Normal? How many terrible things have been hidden behind that word? "No," I said. "What's normal is choosing together." Not one person deciding and the other obeying. Blake stepped forward. I didn't step back. You've been poisoned by nonsense, he said quietly. Feminist ideas, independence, freedom. Don't you see? Women like you always end up alone. There it was. The familiar curse. How long have you been using that fear? I asked. The fear that if I don't obey, I'll be abandoned. Blake opened his mouth, then closed it. He didn't answer. And in that silence, I understood. He had never been afraid of me leaving. He was only afraid of me realizing I could. I'm not yours, I said, each word deliberate, carved into the air. I never was. I was just someone who stayed too long. That sentence made him step back half a pace. I saw it in his eyes, not anger anymore, but panic, as if the wall he'd leaned on for 7 years had suddenly been pulled away. If you walk out tonight, he said hoarsely, don't come back. I looked at him for a long moment. There was a time when those words would have crushed me. I would have begged, negotiated, wondered if I was wrong. But now, I only saw clearly. You've used that line too many times, I said, and I always came back. I opened the door. Light poured in, strong, direct, unforgiving. But this time, I added without turning around, I'm not walking out to go to someone else. I paused for a beat. I'm walking out to leave being treated like an object. The door closed behind me. And for the first time in my life, I understood something with absolute clarity. Not every door that closes is a loss. Some doors are an exit. The doorbell rang at exactly 7 o'clock. Not early. Not late. Just a small detail. But I stood frozen for a few seconds before opening the door. For 7 years of marriage, on time had always been flexible, depending on Blake's mood, depending on whether he felt I was worth waiting for. I opened the door. Ryan was standing there. Not leaning against the doorframe, not peering into my house as if it were his territory. He simply stood upright, hands tucked into the pockets of a light jacket, a very slight smile on his face. Hi, Serena, he said, if you still want to go. That was all. No, are you ready yet? No hurry up, no impatient glance, a question, a choice. I nodded. I'm ready. Ryan stepped back half a pace, almost instinctively, giving me space. He opened the car door for me, a gesture so simple it made my chest tighten. Blake had done that once, in our first year. The car pulled away. Nashville slid past the window, familiar yet strange. I sat still, hands resting on my lap, my palms slightly damp. I realized I was waiting for something, a comment, a joke, an evaluation. But nothing came. Ryan didn't blast music. He didn't ask probing questions. He didn't force conversation. The silence in the car wasn't tense. It felt like space. Space where I could breathe. Are you okay? He asked after a few minutes. His tone was neutral, not prying. I nodded. I think I am. He nodded back. No follow-up, no pressure. The restaurant he chose was a small Italian place, warm lighting, white tablecloths, low candles, not flashy, not performative, but enough to tell me he had thought about it. Ryan pulled out my chair, waited until I sat before taking his seat across from me. I noticed my hand hesitate as I picked up my water glass, an old reflex. I was used to being interrupted, corrected, told I was doing too much. No one said anything. Just the candle flickering between us. I should say this first, I said, breaking the silence. I'm not sure why I'm here. Ryan smiled. That makes sense. I looked up. It does? After what happened yesterday, he said. I think feeling confused, feeling lost, is completely normal. No judgment. No suggestion that I was doing something wrong. I swallowed. I've been married for 7 years. I've never done this. I know, he said gently. And if you want to go home right now, I'll take you. That sentence made me go still. Not because it was romantic, but because it gave me an exit. I thought of the house on Maple Avenue, of the kitchen that morning, of the words, "You're mine." My stomach tightened. No, I said, more firmly than I expected. I don't want to go home. Ryan didn't look pleased, didn't look victorious. He simply nodded, as if I'd said something important, and he respected it. When the food arrived, we started talking. Not the kind of talking meant to impress, not an interview, just talking. He told me about architecture, how he saw structures, cracks, foundations. I listened, really listened. And when I talked about my work, he didn't interrupt. Didn't change the subject. Didn't check his phone. "You speak very clearly," he said. "The way you think?" I paused. "Clearly?" "Yes," he said. Without apologizing. Without circling around things. I gave a small smile. "I used to apologize a lot." "I know," he said. I looked up. "How do you know?" Ryan hesitated for a beat. "I observe." I tensed slightly. He noticed immediately. "Not in a creepy way," he added. "I'm an architect. I'm used to watching how things function. People too." He looked at me. Not intensely, not invasively, just honestly. "I've seen a woman who's always shrinking herself," he said, as if she's afraid of taking up too much space. My throat tightened. "And I've also seen another woman," he continued, "when she thinks no one's watching, when she smiles to herself, when she walks differently. No one had ever spoken to me like that. No one had ever seen me that way." "I'm not saying this to convince you of anything," Ryan said. "I just think you should know. You're not who your husband describes." I looked down at the napkin in my hands. My chest ached in a strange, unfamiliar way. "Thank you," I said quietly, "for saying that." We had dessert, shared a tiramisu, lightly debated coffee. I laughed, a real laugh, not guarded, not careful. And then I saw him. Blake. He stood at the entrance of the restaurant like a storm, face flushed, eyes scanning the room. Before I could say anything, he saw me. My heart dropped. Ryan saw him too. He stood up immediately, not touching me, not pulling me away, just positioning himself naturally in front of me. "Serena!" Blake snarled. "What the hell are you doing?" The whole restaurant turned. Ryan spoke first, his voice calm but firm. "Blake, you're disturbing people. We should talk outside." "Move," Blake snapped. "That's my wife." My wife. I stood up. My legs were shaking, but I stood straight. And in that moment, I knew. This date was no longer about Ryan. It was about choice. "No," I said. Both men turned to look at me. "No," I repeated. "I'm not going with you." The air went rigid, and I knew the worst part and the most important part had just begun. The moment Blake walked into the restaurant, I knew. He hadn't come to talk. He had come to take back what he believed was his. The glass door flew open hard enough to make the bell above it clang wildly. Every conversation in the restaurant seemed to be strangled mid-sentence. Blake stood there, breathing heavily, his face flushed, his eyes sweeping the room like a hunter who had just spotted his prey. Then he saw me. That look, I used to be afraid of it. But tonight, I saw what was behind it. Panic. Blake strode toward our table, oblivious to the stares now fixed on him. Chairs scraped back, forks froze mid-air, whispers rippled like an undercurrent. "What the hell are you doing?" he roared. Too loud. too raw. "Who do you think you are?" Ryan stood up immediately. He didn't touch me. He didn't command me. He simply positioned himself between Blake and me, steady, calm. "Blake," Ryan said, his voice low and controlled, "you're disturbing people. We should step outside and talk." "Get out of the way," Blake snarled. "This is family business." Family. A word that once made me bow my head. "That's my wife," Blake shouted, pointing at me. "You have no right." "Enough!" That voice was mine. Not loud, not shaking, but clear enough that even I was startled. Both Ryan and Blake turned to look at me. I stood up. My legs trembled. My heart pounded like it was trying to break free of my chest. I could feel every pair of eyes in the restaurant on me. Strangers, unwilling witnesses. Part of me wanted to disappear. But another part, the part that had been suppressed for far too long, stepped forward. "You don't get to talk to me like that," I said. Blake glared. "You're humiliating me in front of everyone." I laughed, a short, sharp laugh, painful but lucid. "No," I said. "You're doing that yourself." He turned on Ryan, his face twisted with rage. "Who do you think you are? Some washed-up neighbor playing hero?" Ryan didn't respond. He simply stood there. His silence only enraged Blake further. "Serena." Blake turned back to me, his voice dropping, urgent. "Go home. Now." I looked at him. For 7 years, I had heard this command in countless forms. Go home. Don't make a scene. Don't embarrass me. Don't do this. Don't do that. And I had always obeyed. But tonight, in a restaurant full of people, one brutal truth became crystal clear. If I didn't say no here, I would never say it again. "No," I said. The restaurant fell dead silent. Blake blinked. "What did you say?" "I said no," I repeated. My voice trembled slightly, but it didn't retreat. "I'm not going home with you. Not tonight. Maybe not ever." Blake's face contorted. "You can't do this to me." "You've been doing this to me for 7 years," I said. "You're just not used to hearing me say it out loud." All this over one stupid joke. "It wasn't one joke," I cut in. "It was hundreds. Hundreds of times you made me feel small, inconvenient, unworthy. This isn't one bad day. This is 7 bad years strung together." Blake turned to the crowd, searching for allies. "Look at her! She's making a scene!" I took a deep breath. "You're proving exactly what I just said," I replied. "Even now, you need to turn me into a spectacle so you don't have to face yourself." A restaurant manager approached, followed by security. "Sir," the manager said firmly to Blake, "you need to leave immediately." Blake looked around. For the first time, he realized no one was on his side. He turned back to me, his eyes bitter, desperate. "You'll regret this," he whispered. "You'll see. No one will ever love you like I did." I looked at him and felt no fear. "Maybe," I said, "but at least I won't have to live inside that fear anymore." Security stepped in. Blake was escorted outside. He kept looking back, muttering the same familiar threats. The door closed. The sound wasn't loud, but to me it rang like a full stop. I sat down. My whole body shook as the adrenaline drained away, leaving a vast emptiness behind. Ryan sat across from me. He didn't press. He didn't touch me without permission. "Are you okay?" he asked. I thought for a moment. Then I told the truth. "I just said no." Ryan smiled very softly. "I know." And in that moment, in a restaurant full of strangers, I realized I didn't choose Ryan. I didn't betray my marriage. I chose myself. And from the moment I said no, my old life had officially come to an end. That night, I slept alone. Not the kind of alone that feels lonely. The kind I had felt for 7 years lying next to Blake. But alone in the truest sense. No reproaches. No irritated sighs. No need to monitor every word that left my mouth. I slept deeply. No dreams. No waking in the middle of the night, wondering what I had done wrong. The next morning, I woke up with a strange sensation. Lightness. But things didn't end just because I had said no in a restaurant. Blake didn't let go that easily. He was waiting for me in the living room when I came home. Empty beer cans scattered across the table. The air thick with disappointment and anger. He started talking. A lot. Blaming. Criticizing. Pitying himself. Promising to change. Threatening. Begging. All the familiar roles, only this time I didn't step into the play with him. I sat down. I listened. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. When he finally ran out of words, I said one sentence, short, clear, stripped of emotion. I want a divorce. The room went completely still. Blake stared at me as if I'd spoken in a language he'd never learned. Then he laughed, a disbelieving laugh. "You're not serious," he said. "All this over one stupid night?" "No," I replied. "Because I disappeared for 7 years inside this marriage." He promised to change, promised therapy, promised to love me the right way. But I had learned something crucial. Promises made only when someone is about to lose control are not the same as remorse. I slept in the living room. A week later, I started looking for an apartment. A month later, I signed the divorce papers. There was no celebration, no dramatic tears, just a quiet truth. It was over. The months that followed were not easy. There were mornings I woke up wondering if I was selfish. Evenings when I sat alone, the apartment so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat. Moments when I missed the early version of Blake, the one who had once made me believe I was loved. But whenever doubt tried to pull me back, I remembered those words. "You're mine." And I knew I had chosen correctly. I moved into a small apartment in Germantown. Morning light poured through large windows, a balcony just big enough for a few potted plants. No one complained when I woke up early to run. No one told me I was doing too much. I began to live again, bit by bit. I accepted a higher position at work. No permission asked. No fear of making someone look bad. I signed up for a weekend pottery class, hands covered in clay, creating imperfect things that were entirely mine. I laughed more, breathed easier, apologized less. And I realized something important. I wasn't rescued. I walked out on my own. Ryan was still there. Quiet, unhurried. We drank coffee, took walks, talked. Sometimes just sat in silence. He never pushed me to become anything other than myself. It was a full year before we officially named the relationship. Not because I was afraid, but because I was no longer running. As for Blake, his life didn't collapse overnight, but it shrank. His reputation at work changed. The barbecue story spread. The people who once laughed along started looking at him differently. He lost his position, lost opportunities, lost the ability to blame me. I heard about it not with satisfaction, just a quiet sadness for a man who never learned that love is not possession. 1 year after that pivotal day, I stood again in my sister's backyard. The same yellow lights, the same smell of barbecue. But I was different. Ryan stood across the yard, smiling at me. Not a possessive smile, but one that said, "You are you, and that is enough." My sister handed me a glass of lemonade. "You look happy," she said. I nodded. I am. And this time, I didn't need to prove it to anyone. I learned a lesson I wish I had learned sooner. When someone calls your silence being understanding, when they call your pain being sensitive, when they call you theirs, that isn't love. Love doesn't make you smaller. Love doesn't require you to disappear so it can exist. That night, the night I said 7 o'clock, was never about a date. It was the moment I chose myself. And since then, I have never looked back. If you've made it this far, perhaps somewhere inside you there's been a moment like mine. A moment when you asked yourself, am I living my own life? I used to confuse love with endurance, patience with maturity. But I learned one thing. Anyone who truly loves you will never need you to make yourself smaller so they can feel bigger. If my story helped you see yourself in it, even just a little, remember this. Saying no doesn't make you selfish. It simply means you are respecting yourself. Thank you for listening to my journey. If you'd like to keep hearing real stories about awakening, healing, and choosing yourself again, subscribe to the channel and stay with me. We are not alone on this path.